The studio was buzzing with the usual pre-show energy. Technicians adjusted cameras, producers whispered last-minute instructions into earpieces, and the host, Martin Hayes, reviewed his cue cards under the bright stage lights. It was just another night of the Evening Report, a prime-time talk show known for in-depth interviews with high-profile guests. That evening's guest was Matthew Reeves, a well-respected investigative journalist with a reputation for uncovering secrets most people weren't meant to know. He had exposed corporate scandals, political cover-ups, and even claims of secret government experiments. Reeves wasn't just another journalist. He was the kind of man who made enemies in high places. At precisely 8 p.m., the show went live. Millions of viewers tuned in across the country, watching as the opening music faded, and Martin Hayes greeted his audience with a charismatic smile. "Tonight we have a very special guest. He's fearless, he's relentless, and his latest investigation might just be his most shocking yet. Please welcome Matthew Reeves." The studio audience erupted into applause as Reeves walked onto the stage, shaking hands with Hayes before settling into the chair across from him. He was calm, confident, and slightly amused by the energy of the crowd. For the first 15 minutes, everything went as expected. They discussed his career, his past investigations, and his thoughts on current events. Then, just as they were about to transition into the real reason Reeves had come on the show, it happened. A moment that would go down in television history. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A flicker. A strange shift in the camera feed that most people wouldn't have noticed if they weren't watching closely. 1 second, Reeves was mid-sentence, leaning slightly forward, his hands gesturing as he spoke. The next second, he was gone. Not in a dramatic flash of light, not in a blur of movement. One moment, he was there. The next, his chair was empty. The studio audience went silent. The host blinked, confused, staring at the now vacant seat in front of him. The camera operator hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in or cut to commercial. The control room was in chaos, producers yelling into their headsets, demanding to know what just happened. Martin Hayes let out a nervous chuckle, assuming, like everyone else in the room, that this was some kind of elaborate prank. "All right, Matt. Very funny. Where'd you go?" Silence. Someone in the audience let out a confused murmur. The show's crew rushed onto the set, searching behind the furniture, checking under the desk, even glancing toward the stage exits. But Matthew Reeves was nowhere to be found. The broadcast continued live, unedited. Viewers at home were just as confused as those in the studio. Social media exploded within minutes. Did anyone else just see that? Where did Matthew Reeves go? This has to be some kind of camera trick, right? The network cut to an emergency commercial break. By the time they returned, the host looked visibly shaken. There was no explanation given, no joke, no reassurance, only an abrupt decision to end the episode early. By midnight, the police had arrived. Every exit, every corridor, every room in the building was searched. Security footage was pulled. The building was locked down. Nothing. There was no trace of Matthew Reeves. And worse, no one could explain how he had disappeared. The footage was replayed over and over again. Every television station, every news outlet, and every social media platform dissected the moment in slow motion, trying to understand what had just happened. From one frame to the next, Matthew Reeves simply vanished. There was no sign of movement, no sudden blur, as if he had stood up and walked away. His microphone remained clipped to his lapel, resting on the chair as if his body had dissolved around it. The show's lighting remained consistent. The shadows never changed. There was no camera cut, no transition, no special effects. And yet, he was gone. The production team was in chaos. Security was alerted immediately, assuming Reeves had somehow slipped away as part of a planned stunt. But as they scoured the studio, checking every hallway, every locked door, and every exit, they realized something chilling. The building's surveillance system had been running the entire time. From the moment Reeves entered the studio that evening, his every move had been recorded. They tracked his arrival, his time in the green room, and his walk onto the stage. But after his disappearance, the cameras showed nothing. No one leaving. No hidden escape route. Reeves had simply ceased to exist. The show's host, Martin Hayes, sat in his dressing room, his hands shaking as he replayed the raw studio feed on a loop. He called for the director, the producers, anyone who could offer an explanation. "Tell me this is a hoax," he muttered. "Tell me he planned this." No one had an answer. But then, something even stranger emerged. While reviewing the footage frame by frame, one of the editors noticed something unsettling. In the split second before Reeves vanished, a distortion appeared in the video feed. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't compression artifacting. It was a shape. Behind Reeves, just over his left shoulder, the air seemed to ripple, like heat rising from pavement. It lasted for less than half a second, but as they slowed the footage down further, a faint silhouette took form. A human figure, faceless, tall, watching. And then, Reeves was gone. Some of the show's staff dismissed it as a trick of the light, a camera malfunction. But others weren't so sure. Viewers at home began analyzing the footage themselves, posting screenshots, zooming in on the distortion. Conspiracy forums exploded overnight. Did anyone else see the shadow? What was standing behind him? This isn't just a disappearance. This is something else. Within 24 hours, the clip had become one of the most analyzed pieces of television footage in history. But there was one last chilling discovery. After isolating the audio from Reeves's microphone, sound engineers noticed something just before the moment he vanished. A whisper, barely audible, distorted, warped like a voice underwater. It lasted only half a second, but when slowed down, it was clear enough to make out two words. "He's ready." And then, silence. Matthew Reeves was gone, and no one could explain where he went. In the days that followed Matthew Reeves' disappearance, the world demanded answers. News anchors replayed the footage in endless loops, forensic video analysts examined the frames, and skeptics dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. But there was one problem. There was no explanation. Law enforcement launched a full-scale investigation. The studio was locked down, security tapes analyzed, and everyone who had been present that night was interviewed. Reeves's family, his colleagues, even the production crew, no one had any knowledge of a stunt or pre-planned disappearance. There were no ransom notes, no threats, no traces of Reeves inside the building or anywhere outside it. His phone, which had been in his pocket during the broadcast, never pinged another cell tower. His car was still in the station's parking lot. His bank accounts remained untouched. His home was exactly as he left it. He had simply vanished from reality itself. The footage breakdown, what experts found. As investigators combed through every second of footage, looking for an answer, they made three unsettling discoveries. The shadow that shouldn't exist. The figure that appeared behind Reeves wasn't just a visual distortion. Advanced video analysis confirmed that whatever it was had depth. It wasn't a trick of lighting. The figure cast a faint shadow, meaning it was physically present for a split second before Reeves vanished. The microphone recording and the voice. After enhancing the whisper captured on Reeves's microphone, audio analysts isolated more than just, "He's ready." There was something else, something deeper, buried beneath layers of static. A low, rhythmic breathing sound, as if something was standing right next to him. The live audience's reaction, or lack of it. Perhaps the strangest discovery of all came from reviewing the crowd's response. As Reeves vanished, not a single audience member reacted in real time. Only after the host turned to the empty chair did people begin to panic. One frame-by-frame analysis suggested something horrifying. For a brief moment, the audience didn't seem to notice Reeves was gone at all. It was as if their perception had been altered, as if, for a fraction of a second, reality had rewritten itself. The theories that followed. With no rational explanation, theories began to spread like wildfire. Theory 1. A hoax gone wrong. The first assumption was simple. Reeves had staged his own disappearance, a publicity stunt, an elaborate trick. But if this was the case, why had the network refused to air reruns? Why had the production crew, who would have been in on the stunt, never spoken about it again? If it was a trick, it was one of the most elaborate and flawless illusions ever pulled off. Theory 2. A government cover-up. Reeves wasn't just a journalist. He was an investigative reporter known for exposing corruption and classified projects. Days before his disappearance, he had been working on a story. One that, according to leaked emails, involved something called Project Blackout. His colleagues claimed Reeves had seemed nervous, even paranoid, before his final broadcast. He had mentioned that if anything happened to him, they would make sure no one ever found him. But who were they? Theories ran wild. Had Reeves been erased? Had he uncovered something that led to his removal? And if so, how did they do it on live television? Theory 3. A reality glitch? The most unsettling theory came from those who analyzed the anomalies in the footage. What if Reeves had never left the room? Some speculated that his disappearance wasn't an act of removal, but of displacement. That whatever took him didn't move him. It changed the way reality perceived him. The whisper, the flickering shadow, the way the audience didn't react until seconds later. What if Reeves had been erased from perception, not just existence? A final clue, and the emails that shouldn't exist. Weeks after the investigation led nowhere, something chilling happened. Reeves' former colleagues began receiving emails from his personal account. The subject lines were always the same. "I'm still here." But the messages contained nothing, only an attached file. The files were short, static-filled audio recordings. Most of them unrecognizable, distorted beyond comprehension. But one stood out. It contained only 5 words, a voice that barely sounded human. They took me mid-sentence. Then, silence. The email account was deactivated soon after, and Matthew Reeves was never seen again. Days turned into weeks. The investigation into Matthew Reeves's disappearance stalled. The talk show episode that aired that night was pulled from all network archives. Reruns were never broadcast. No official statement was given, only a vague corporate response claiming, "The matter remains under investigation." But outside the mainstream media, theories continued to spread like wildfire. The footage had been recorded by viewers, uploaded, and analyzed across the internet. Thousands of people studied every frame, hoping to find something that had been missed. They weren't alone, because something, or someone, wanted them to keep looking. And it started with the emails. The first email, a message from nowhere. 2 weeks after Reeves vanished, his former producer, Elaine Carter, received an email from his personal account. The subject line was simple: "I'm still here." There was no message, no explanation, just an audio file attached, one that had no reason to exist. Elaine hesitated before playing it. The moment she did, her speakers crackled with static. At first it was nothing, just garbled noise. Then, something formed beneath the distortion. A voice. Low, broken, barely human. They took me mid-sentence. Then, silence. Elaine sat frozen. She called the police, forwarded the email to investigators, and tried to rationalize what she had just heard. But by the time law enforcement traced the sender's location, the email account had already been deleted. It no longer existed. Neither did the file. Elaine tried to play it again, but it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. The spread, others begin receiving messages. Elaine wasn't the only one. Over the next several weeks, Matthew Reeves's close friends, family, and colleagues all reported receiving similar emails, each one identical. Subject: I'm still here. No message, just a single attachment. Some messages contained nothing but white noise. Others had fragments of whispered sentences, too distorted to fully understand. One, sent to a former coworker, contained the clearest recording yet. A voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where I am. It's not dark, but it's empty. I see something moving. They're watching me. And then, laughter. Not Matthew's, something else. A slow, echoing chuckle that didn't belong to a human throat. And just like before, once the file had been opened, it vanished. No one could forward the messages. No one could save the attachments. They only played once. The woman who saw him, or something pretending to be him. Among those investigating the case was an independent journalist named Leah Moore. She had been covering missing persons cases for years, but Reeves's disappearance fascinated her. She had studied the footage, spoken to former co-workers, and even received one of the infamous emails herself. But she wasn't prepared for what happened next. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the talk show's studio, Leah caught movement on her screen. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a shadow flickering in the reflection of the set's glossy floor. Then she froze. Because it wasn't just any shadow. It was a man, Matthew Reeves, standing in the exact spot where he had disappeared. His face was pale, his eyes wide, unblinking, his mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-sentence. Then, slowly, his head turned. And in that instant, Leah's screen cut to black. The footage was gone. But before the screen shut off completely, Leah swore she heard a voice whisper from her speakers. You're looking too closely. The forgotten interview, and the last words that made sense. Before Reeves vanished, he had spoken to a fellow journalist about his upcoming investigation. The interview was casual, but there was one moment that stood out, something he said that, at the time, didn't seem important. I've been researching something strange, he had said, smiling. People who disappear mid-sentence, mid-thought, like reality forgets them before they finish speaking. His colleague had laughed it off, but Matthew Reeves never finished his last sentence. And now, it seemed, he wasn't forgotten. He was trapped. Somewhere. The disappearance of Matthew Reeves remained one of the most unsettling, unsolved mysteries in television history. Though the network had scrubbed the footage from official archives, it continued to circulate among amateur investigators and conspiracy theorists. But one particular recording, discovered years later, changed everything. A forgotten angle, a frame that had never been aired, and it revealed something no one was prepared for. The camera that was never supposed to be found. A decade after Reeves vanished, a freelance editor named Daniel Corrigan was sifting through old broadcast archives for an unrelated documentary. He had access to raw, unedited footage from hundreds of old shows. That's when he stumbled upon it. A backup reel from the night of Matthew's disappearance. What made this clip different? It was from a different camera angle, one that had never been aired. One that faced behind Matthew, showing what had been behind him before he vanished. Daniel pressed play. For the first several minutes, nothing unusual happened. The host was speaking. Matthew was responding, mid-sentence, as he had been before he disappeared. Then, it happened. But this time from this angle, something else was visible. Right before Matthew vanished, the camera picked up something standing behind him. A figure, barely visible, just a shape, a blur in the shadows. But then, it moved. A fraction of a second before Reeves disappeared, the shadow reached for him. The frame that changed everything. Daniel froze the footage, rewound, played it frame by frame. At first, it was hard to tell if the movement was real or a simple video distortion. But as he advanced the recording one frame at a time, he noticed something chilling. The figure wasn't just a shadow. It had eyes that, for the briefest moment, locked onto Matthew's. And in that same instant, he was gone. No fade out, no blur, just erased. What was it, and why couldn't anyone see it? Daniel enhanced the frame, sharpening the image as much as possible. The figure was still blurry, but its shape was unmistakable. Tall, thin, with impossibly long fingers. And its head? It was tilted, watching. Almost studying Matthew, the way a scientist watches an experiment. That was when Daniel noticed something even stranger. The figure wasn't standing on the ground. It was suspended, as if hanging from the ceiling, or floating. And then, for the briefest moment, it turned toward the camera, turned toward him, as if it knew, as if it had just realized it was being watched. The footage disappears again. Daniel panicked. He immediately made copies of the footage, backing it up on multiple hard drives. He emailed the file to himself, uploaded it to a private cloud, even saved screenshots. He wasn't about to let this disappear too. But when he returned the next morning, it was gone. Every backup, every copy. The email attachments had been corrupted. The cloud file was empty. Even the original broadcast archive had been erased. It was as if the footage had never existed. As if something, or someone, didn't want it to be seen. The final frame and Matthew's last expression. There was only one thing left. Daniel had printed a single frame, the very last clear shot of Matthew Reeves before he vanished. He held it up to the light, staring at the man's expression. Matthew wasn't smiling anymore. His face was frozen in terror, his mouth slightly open, as if gasping, as if he saw what was behind him in his final second. And then Daniel noticed something else, something no one had mentioned before, something no one had ever talked about in any theory, in any news report, in any discussion. Just before he disappeared, just before he was taken, Matthew's own shadow was missing. Final words, the broadcast that never ended. Theories exploded. Had Matthew Reeves been erased from reality itself? Had he seen something no one else was meant to see? Or was he still out there? Still trapped? Still watching? Because on the exact anniversary of his disappearance, at the exact same time, something strange happened during a random live broadcast. For a fraction of a second, so fast that most people missed it, a face appeared, distorted, blurred, but not unrecognizable. It was Matthew Reeves, mouth open, eyes wide, as if he was trying to say something. But the moment people tried to rewind and capture the frame, it was gone, just like him. What do you think happened to Matthew Reeves? If you want a part 2, hit like and subscribe, or the next time you watch TV, make sure you're still there when the broadcast ends. Eyes,